Hi, and welcome to the Brookdale Visiting Writers Series. I'm here today with poet, teacher, and Catskill Poetry Conference Director Carol Frost. Carol Frost has published 9 collections of poetry, the most recent being Venus and Don Juan, which was shortlisted for the Kingsley Amis Award, Tufts Award. Love and Scorn, New and Selected Poems, which was shortlisted for the Pulitzer Prize, and I Will Say Beauty. She has a book called The Queen's Desertion, which is coming in the spring of 2006. She's won 2 fellowships for the National Endowments for the Arts, 3 Pushcart Prizes, and has been nominated every year for the last 16 years for a Pushcart Prize. So we're here today to talk about poetry, her work, and the process of writing. So welcome, Carol.
Thank you very much. Glad to be here.
Glad to have you here. I actually just wanted to start off talking about your work. I've heard your work described as high lyric, and someone else has said it is luxurious in a deeply moral way. And I'm not quite sure what they even meant about that high lyric thing, but I was wondering how you would describe your work.
Well, I like the notion of high lyric. It might have been something I said at one point.
Oh, okay.
Lyric as opposed to narrative, first of all, I suppose. Narrative being more involved with chronology. Mm-hmm. and with a kind of linearness or lineality. I think that lyric poetry is more involved with a compression of time. There's often a suppressed narrative. I don't think you can completely quash narrative, although it has been my desire sometimes to try to. But no, people are interested in interesting human events, no doubt. But the lyric is more interested, I suppose, in the sound of language, in the moment of perception or moment of realization, in a working out of a moral dilemma, or perhaps not so lugubrious, a moment of great joy and understanding.
Sure. Do you find that you don't work that much in a narrative tradition?
No, I think I don't. I did for a while because I felt I needed to know how to do it, recognizing that I don't. And I do think that what poets do is that they come to poetry with their own talents and interests. And that's probably so for any artist. I think I decided at one point that because I was naturally disposed toward the lyric poem, that I ought to know how to write narrative, and so I set out to do that and published a book of poems. I think they're all narrative poems in a book called Day of the Body, and certainly that informed my sense of how to write lyric poetry. But no, I don't come out of the narrative tradition.
Okay. You said you just said that everyone brings their own talents to their writing. So of course I've got to ask, what talents do you feel you're bringing to your writing?
Oh well, the lyric understanding of what the lyric is. I don't know. You really threw me a curveball there. I don't think I should talk about my talents particularly.
That's understood. That's understood. When we spoke previously, I had mentioned that one of my favorite collections of yours is Pure. And which is just a gorgeous book. It's so intelligent and beautiful in the imagery and the sounds of it. You said you'd gotten that reaction from a lot of people, that book spoke to a lot of people, and I was wondering why. Yeah,
I'm not exactly sure why, but it seems to have been my breakout book. Yeah. The book I spoke of about a minute ago, Day of the Body, I think maybe proved to whoever is reading poetry that I knew how to write it, but Pure was really the beginning of what I thought I knew how to do, or was interested in investigating, and that was how to write a certain kind of lyric poem, the high lyric, the poem that probably whose sense of contingency is as apt to be aural, according to the ear, and what something sounds like, as it is to be according to what it's talking about. Because I think poetry finally is not just about something, it is something. And what that thing is, though it would be very hard for me to define in finite terms, surely has something to do with with the sound of words.
Did you feel like it was a breakout book when you were writing it? Did you think, oh, this is something special, I got it?
Yeah, I did kind of have that sense. I started writing those, well, the poems that are in that book are my 11-line poems that I invented when I was trying to get away from narrative. The interesting thing is that when you work toward, and perhaps this is not true for everyone, but when I work toward a style of poetry, or either to try to teach me something or to try to discover about what I might be able to do, I can get stuck in it. So after writing all those narrative poems for Day of the Body, then I was stuck there. And I was trying to write about a couple of events, which of course do involve chronology, but wasn't happy with the narrative technique. And so I tried something entirely different, and that resulted in an 11-line poem. And I thought, oh, that's pretty interesting. Why don't I try to do another one? And so I wrote another one that was similar, and with those two poems I came up with a series of rules and principles about how to write these 11-line poems.
What are those rules and principles then?
All right, 11 lines, although I have one 13-line 11-liner, and I have a 6-line, 5.5-line 11-liner, so that adds up to, if I had two of them, that would be 11 lines, wouldn't it?
You gotta have exceptions.
Right, yes. The idea is to have, each of the poems has an abstract title, like Pure, or Thrill, and that abstraction has to appear somewhere in the body of the poem. Perhaps not as the same word. Pure, I think, does appear as pure, but adultery is another title of another poem, and the word appears as adulterated, so in a slightly different form. Each of the poems attempts to, in highly metaphoric terms, to define the abstraction.
Sure.
And without using abstract words, but again, metaphorically, the lines, I wanted the lines to be as long as possible, without splicing together 2 or 3 shorter lines, which is what a lot of long lines are.
Yeah.
I also wanted to compel the syntax in directions that I wasn't used to. There are a couple of, what else? No, I guess that's about it. Maybe there are a couple of other principles in there, but, and it changed, of course, during, I know what, suppressing narrative. I wanted to suppress the narrative and to see how little narrative I could get away with.
And so this was all a conscious choice. You set rules for yourself, and...
Based on, basically, first the 2 poems. I just looked at them and saw what I was doing, and then developed after that. I wrote about, I guess I wrote 40 or 50 of them over a 5-year, 6-year period. And they're very hard to write. Oh, another principle is don't ever say what's expected. Always try to take the poem in a direction that people wouldn't imagine.
Well, I think of your poem Sexual Jealousy, which is all about the queen mole. Right. And you know, that's not the typical thing one thinks about with sexual jealousy. It's a great poem.
Thank you very much. Yeah.
You actually said you did this to break yourself out of the narrative mode you're in. One of the things I always wondered is, once you created this incredibly complex and effective 11-line form, was it hard then to try and get out of the form itself?
Yes, just as it was difficult for me to get out of writing narratives after I wrote so many for that book. I began to think that every poem should be about 11 lines long. And certain novels, too, maybe could be done in 11 lines. Why couldn't Paradise Lost be 11 lines long, for instance? And it took me a good 1.5 years or more to work away from that form. I ended up writing a lot of very bad poems in rhyming couplets, just because the necessities of that form, which are certain and a little bit difficult, got me away from the rules and principles that I had set up for myself in this other form.
Do you like the limitations the form puts on you?
I like two things about it. I think the limitations are easy in a certain sense, 11 lines, right? But how a form performs in those limitations, that's what interests me. And as soon as I found that I had discovered pretty much every way of making the space of that poem work, then I started to lose interest in it.
Are there other forms you're drawn to? Are you a big villanelle fan, or?
I really don't. I almost said I hate the villanelle. That's not really true, but I'm not fond of people thinking, oh well, I'm going to be a formalist for a while, and so I'll write a lot of villanelles or a lot of sestinas. Besides, I think they're very hard to write, aren't they?
Yeah.
Yes. Maybe that's really what it is, just that they're difficult. Yeah.
Now, I know you have a new book, The Queen's Desertion, that's coming up in 2006.
Yes.
Are any of these 11-line forms, are you still working in this occasionally?
No. Well, no. A couple of years after I stopped writing those poems, and that was probably about 98 or so, I would, if I didn't have any luck writing, if I found myself dry, then I could always fall back on an 11-liner, but I didn't publish those. It just made me feel like I was doing something, sitting at my desk for several hours at a time. No, since then I've been interested in other forms, other ways of surprising myself, or looking at what language can surprise me into. Syntaxes, line lengths, changing where the line, or even print culture. A book of mine that came out, what was it, I guess in 2000, 2003, I Will Say Beauty. All of the poems are justified on the opposite side. Not left-hand justified, but right-hand justified.
So you're looking at the line and you're playing with that, and that energizes you.
Yes, I think probably all poets feel this to some extent, that's what poetry is. It's the way a sentence drapes across lines, and it comes down to the line. But that doesn't mean that that the line itself dispatches the meaning. It means that it gives you all sorts of possibility for heightening emotion, idea, and visual thing, any number of things.
I like that idea. I have to use that when I teach, that the way with the sentence drapes itself across the line.
Yeah.
That's nice. That's very nice in the way it moves the whole thing together.
Yeah, well, prose is sentences, and wonderful sentences. Some sentences that we can certainly think of as being poetic. Any number of fiction writers do that, but the focus in poetry is less on the sentence as an entity, but a sentence measured through the line and by the line. And the line can be counted in syllables. It can be measured from the left-hand margin to the right, or it can be rhymed, and that will give you a reason for understanding the line as a line. All kinds of possibilities.
Great. Well, I think we're going to take a break now. When we return, we'll have more discussion with Carol Frost. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Max Weinberg, and I'm a musician, but most importantly, I'm a parent. I'd like to speak to you today about a subject that's very important to me, and I know, of course, that it's important to you, our children. To best understand the challenges that our children face every day, well, I'm going to ask you to go back in time and remember the challenges that you faced as a child. How did you handle the bully in the locker room? How did you handle being left out of the group in the cafeteria? Do you remember who first tried to get you to smoke a cigarette, or try a beer, or a joint? How did you handle peer pressure? These are just a few of the challenges that your child faces every day in their young lives. How did you know what the right choice was? Prevention First is a nonprofit agency in Monmouth County that offers educational programs dedicated to strengthening the foundation of our children's lives.
Hi, and welcome back to the Brookdale Visiting Writers Series. I'm here today speaking with poet Carol Frost. And before the break, we were talking about her 11-line form that she created, and which has produced these wonderful, intelligent poems. And I think you were going to share with us the first poem?
Yes, I thought I'd do that.
You wrote in that 11-line form? Great.
Yeah. I won't say this was the hardest to write, but it sure wasn't easy. They're brain-breaking to do, frankly. Okay, this is called The Past. Was it in stepping into dusk, did a glance release this turbulence, where Martin's fields thicken with thorn apple and a migratory bird makes a sound? Not even the quick flowering of April winds alters it, what a man in a straw hat bending down above the scythe's reach found, only now so saturated with rust and greatly indrawn, the way it is in the past. Yet the blade seems to will itself to hold an edge, expressing the kind of time which plays around the roots of the grasses and still knows, still passes, still causes shadows to seem to fit themselves around the ankles, refusing separation.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Thank you.
That's wonderful. I'm wondering, you have these wonderful images, these concrete things, and you're connecting them, as you said. You're using these metaphors, and you're looking at these larger, love, jealousy, these abstract thoughts. Which comes first? Are you like, I'm going to write a love poem today? Or do you go, I want to talk about that trout I just caught yesterday?
Right. Well, once I had this project, then often it had to do with the title. And I would, when I write, I very often will sit down for anywhere from 4 to 6 hours, and then finally take a break. I make myself stop after 8 hours. I make myself stop, and I'll go for a walk. And during the walk is when I decide on some revisions, or if the poem is finished, because I've been working on it for several days already. And then the walk becomes a time where I'll consider what to do next. And sometimes I'll say, oh, I know it, I'll write apology, or I'll write comfort. And then I wouldn't know particularly what the metaphor would be. And that was with these poems. Typically, though I don't start with any abstraction, an idea or an emotion, I begin with an image or a metaphor.
Yeah. One of my favorite poems of yours is Custom, which is about bullfighting and the Picadorean bullfighting. And I think of your poems, and you have bullfighting, and you have 2 hunting poems about, To Kill a Deer and Pure. Is that the other one? Yeah. And you have those moles with their sexual jealousy as well. It seems that, as you said, your poems take unusual turns. They're doing the unexpected, which is something I absolutely love about your work. Now, are these things that just sort of pop into your head, or are you actively searching for something that's a little bit more unusual and kind of stretching for that?
Yeah. Well, I think my husband would tell you that it's natural, but he thinks I'm strange anyway. No, it was in part purposeful, that I didn't want to settle on a consideration or a comparison, a likeness that was too easy, that people would be too comfortable with. I think often when folks are too comfortable, then they're not really engaging, not really thinking or feeling. So I have to admit to a certain amount of willfulness there and intent.
Yeah, yeah. Now, you said that you sit for 4 to 6 hours, and 8's your max?
Yes.
When you're writing? Is that your writing process? Do you have a ritual? Do you need a little fuzzy bunny next to your computer? Or? No. I like to be.
I like to be in a place that I'm comfortable in. I like to be in familiar surroundings, although I have written, but it depends what I decide will be comfortable. I've written, during one writing period I wrote several poems in a rowboat. I would just row out to the middle of a lake and then decide to write there. Mm-hmm. But I don't write all the time. I teach, and I don't write when I teach. What happens is that I think I get sort of pent up because I'm not able to write all the time, and then it's pretty easy for me to sit down when I can clear the decks mm-hmm. and wake up the first morning of my writing period and put in a long day. I have no problem with that. I just have problems stopping, yeah. And it's good to stop. It's good because if you think that you should write until you finish the poem, you might finish it too easily, too completely. You don't want a poem to be like a bear trap. Mm-hmm. You know, you want the poem to stay open as long as possible, with possibilities for yourself as a writer and also for the audience, for the reader. I think. Well,
this new book, I think you have the cover there, Queen's Desertion.
Yeah. I'll show it to you.
Yes, please. It's beautiful. Now, again, the artwork is by?
That's by Bruegel the Elder.
And
it's an engraving, which I found many years ago, and always found very compelling because of the facelessness of the beekeepers.
It's wonderful.
Yeah.
It's wonderful. It's a gorgeous cover. Can you describe this book for us? Have you created a 16-line form now? Or
well, let's see. I have a new form in here, actually.
You do?
Yes, I do. I have, the poem is in, the book rather, is in, what is it, in 4 sections. The first section is about dementia, and those poems are fairly normally configured, according to my lights, in free verse lines, mm-hmm. quite a bit of ellipsis and jumping around. Then there's a section of longer poems, but the section that really forms the heart of the book, called Voyage to Black Point. There are over 20 of the poems, and those poems are triple spaced. So basically, what I'm writing in is one-lined stanzas, wow. And my punctuation is colons, double colons, dashes, periods, very few commas, and the syntax tends toward noun phrases. What I was trying to do was to create more energy, to create a kind of propulsion, which I think happens because of the way I've punctuated the poems and what I've done with the syntax, to imitate to some extent the notion of a voyage or travel, of moving. The poem is the book is a lot about motion, about going forward, about going somewhere that can't quite be named.
Now, you said it's in 4 sections?
Yes.
How do you put those sections together? Are you working around, themes, or is it chronological in some sense? Or
usually not chronological. Yeah. In a new and selected, you might do that, for instance. But no, well, in this case, the poems in that Voyage to Black Point are all written in the same style, yeah. So that made sense to keep them together. But I guess really, finally, the book is set up thematically.
It is.
Yeah, loss of mind, loss of body, a voyage to see what could be found, mm-hmm. and perhaps some sense of redemption, some sense of discovery.
Now, do you find that you write towards these? You know in advance that?
No. As I mentioned, it was really against even my better judgment to, with those 11-liners, to start with the idea or the theme, yeah. And I certainly wouldn't do that with a book. I think it's just too difficult to do it. It's like setting yourself, saying, why not write a story about an alcoholic on Christmas Eve who is going to get back together with his family? I mean, it's just impossible to do.
Sounds like a movie pitch.
Right, yes. Well, there are certain, I mean, you you get in your own way if you're thinking topically or thematically. That's not really what poetry is about.
Sure, sure. Do you have, in your own writing process, do you have writers who, you know, you send the poems to and you share work with, or do you work more on your own?
I really work on my own.
Yeah.
I do, yeah. I don't know why. But I think, well, I think one of the reasons I'm a writer is that writing is something you do by yourself. Mm-hmm. And I like to do things by myself. I like to fish by myself. I like to hunt by myself. I like to write. And I even like to go to museums by myself. So that's not a very good answer. Maybe I'm...
No. It seems to me, though, your poems are very much poems, excuse me, of observation. And even these activities, I mean, fishing, although I have limited fishing experience, but fishing and hunting, you know, even just going for walks, you know, rowing out to the middle of the lake, you know, seem to be activities in your own life that would require observation, especially the hunting thing.
Yeah, well, I think fishing too. And
yeah.
When I fish, I like to go out in my kayak during low tide so I can see the bottom. I can see where the fish are likely to be. I think that for me, the world is not about scenery. It's about it's a world of materiality that we don't know enough about, don't enjoy enough, don't know enough.
Well, I think that's a wonderful thought to part with. So I'd like to thank you so much again for coming and speaking
Suzanne.
with us. And again, in spring 2006 by Saraband, Carol Frost.
Northwestern University Press.
Carol Frost's new book will be coming out. So thank you, and this is the Brookdale Visiting Writers Series. Have a good night.